The mysterious signal. The galaxy was at peace. The stars twinkled in their eternal dance, and the planets orbited in harmony. For centuries, this vast region of space had been under the control of the Galactic Council. They had explored, conquered, and advanced, and life was now flourishing across countless worlds. But deep in the corner of the galaxy, a disturbance was brewing, a disturbance that no one could see, and no one expected. It started with a simple signal. At first, it seemed like just another error in the communication systems. After all, space was filled with background noise, cosmic radiation, solar flares, the occasional drifting asteroid. But this signal wasn't like the others. It was strange, almost deliberate. It seemed to pulse in a way that wasn't random, as if someone, or something, was trying to send a message. Captain Ilara Dune, the leader of the Galactica, stood silently in her ship's command room, staring at the large screen that displayed the signal. It had been picked up by one of the outer sensors during a routine patrol. At first, the tech officers had laughed it off, calling it an old transmission, or maybe just an electromagnetic anomaly. But as Ilara studied the signal, a chill ran down her spine. It was too clear, too perfect. And it was coming from a region of space known as the Dead Zone, a place where the human fleet had once disappeared without a trace. The humans had vanished, leaving behind only rumors and shattered memories. No one had dared to enter that space for decades. It was a dead zone in every sense of the word. Ilara's mind raced. She was the captain of the most advanced ship in the galaxy, but even she had heard the stories. The humans had once been an unstoppable force. Their ships, their technology, their ability to wage war, it had all been far beyond anything the Council had ever seen. But the humans were gone now, their once powerful fleets reduced to dust and silence. Or so everyone thought. "Captain, are you sure you want to investigate this?" Lieutenant Tessa Reed, Ilara's second-in-command, asked cautiously. "We all know what happened to the humans. There's nothing left out there." Ilara turned to face her crew. "We don't know that," she said, her voice steady, but her mind was full of questions. "We don't know what's out there, or why that signal is still active. We need to find out." Her decision was met with hesitant nods from the crew. Despite their doubts, they followed her lead. The ship's engines hummed to life, and the Galactica began to shift its course toward the unknown, heading toward the coordinates of the mysterious signal. The journey to the dead zone took several days. During that time, the crew tried to focus on their duties, but the tension in the air was palpable. No one spoke much, each person lost in their thoughts. They all knew that the mission was dangerous, but no one had the courage to say it aloud. After all, the human fleet had disappeared without a trace. There were no survivors. What if the signal was a trap? What if something out there had been waiting for this moment? As they drew closer to the coordinates, the signal grew stronger. It was as if the universe itself was calling them. The communication officer, Ensign Mason, had his hands full trying to decipher the strange pulses, but it was unlike anything he had ever encountered before. "Captain, the signal is becoming more focused. It's like it's guiding us," Mason reported, his voice tinged with confusion. "Whatever is sending this message, it knows we're coming." Ilara nodded, her eyes narrowing. She couldn't explain it, but she felt a growing sense of unease. There were too many unknowns, too many variables, but her curiosity was stronger than her fear. They had to know what was out there, even if it meant risking everything. As the ship approached the coordinates, the galaxy around them seemed to darken. The stars grew distant and faint, as if the light itself was being swallowed by the void. There were no planets here, no moons, not even the faintest glimmer of life. Just a vast expanse of emptiness that stretched endlessly in every direction. "Captain, we've reached the edge of the dead zone," Lieutenant Reed said. "We're in the heart of it now." Ilara stood in front of the command center's main view screen, her eyes locked on the emptiness outside. There was nothing, just blackness. But then, Just as she was about to give the order to turn back, the signal flared to life. It wasn't just a pulse anymore. It was a beacon, a brilliant light flashing in the void. "We've found it," Ilara said softly, her voice filled with both awe and fear. "The source of the signal. It's here." The crew watched in silence as the light on the screen grew brighter, slowly revealing something hidden in the darkness. A shape, a shadow, just beyond the reach of their sensors. It was large, enormous even. And then, in a flash, the shape became clear, a massive object, like nothing they had ever seen. "It's a ship," Lieutenant Reed whispered, her eyes wide in disbelief. "A human ship." But that wasn't possible. The humans were gone. Their ships had vanished without a trace, leaving only myths and ghost stories behind. Yet, here it was, as real as the stars themselves. Ilara's heart raced. They had found something that shouldn't exist. The signal was real. The humans' final mystery was just beginning to unravel. The crew gathered around, their faces filled with shock, curiosity, and fear. What had they just uncovered? And what did it mean for the galaxy? Ilara's voice cut through the silence. "Prepare to board. We're going to find out who, or what, is sending that signal." As the Galactica closed in on the mysterious ship, a feeling of dread settled over them. This wasn't just another mission. This was something far more dangerous, something that could change everything. The crew of the Galactica had just crossed into the unknown, and the secrets waiting for them would shake the foundations of the galaxy. The silence inside the command room was thick, almost suffocating. Captain Ilara Dune stood at the helm of the Galactica, staring at the colossal human warship that loomed ahead. It was unlike any ship the Galactic Council had ever encountered. Its dark, jagged silhouette pierced the black void of space, and faint lights flickered along its hull. The ship seemed almost dormant, like a forgotten monument from a distant past. Ensign Mason, the communications officer, was the first to break the silence. "Captain, I'm trying to hail the vessel." No response. "It's as if it's completely dead. Or, Ilara prompted, her voice sharp. "Or it's been intentionally turned off." Mason finished, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I've never seen anything like this. It's almost as if it's waiting for something." Ilara frowned, her fingers curling around the edge of her command chair. The feeling in her chest grew heavier with each passing second. The ship was old, decades, if not centuries, beyond anything the Galactic Council had ever built. But it was intact. It wasn't just a derelict ship drifting aimlessly. No, this vessel had purpose. "Keep trying to make contact," Ilara ordered, her tone firm. "We need to know if there's anyone on board." The crew fell silent, their eyes locked on the enormous ship ahead of them. Every officer felt the same tension in the air. The unknown was never comfortable, but this felt different. This was more than just a mystery. It was a warning. Yet, despite the overwhelming sense of danger, there was something undeniably captivating about the ship, something that drew them in, made them want to know more. The Galactica crept closer, its engines humming softly as it slowed its approach. The vessel before them was a fortress of steel and darkness, its surface etched with symbols and designs that no one recognized. The faintest glimmer of ancient technology seemed to pulse from its core, giving off a strange, almost hypnotic glow. It was as if the ship itself was alive. Suddenly, a crackling noise came through the speakers, followed by static. Everyone in the room froze. "We've got something," Mason said, his voice tense. "It's faint, but there's a transmission coming through." Ilara leaned forward. "Put it on the main screen." The static cleared, revealing a single distorted voice. The words were broken, almost unintelligible, but the tone was unmistakable, filled with desperation, fear, and an unmistakable warning. "Do not approach. Do not wake it. It is not what you think. It will consume you." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving only silence. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, each person trying to process what they had just heard. "Who was that?" Lieutenant Reed asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," Ilara answered. "But whoever it was, they were in danger. And I think they were warning us." The implications of the message hung in the air like a heavy fog. Was the ship dangerous? Were the humans who had left the message still alive? Or had they been consumed by whatever the mysterious vessel held inside? "We can't just leave it here," Ilara said, her voice steady, despite the growing unease in her heart. "Prepare the boarding party. We're going to find out what's inside." As the boarding party prepared, Ilara's mind raced with questions. The humans had been powerful, no doubt, but what if they had created something more dangerous than any of them had ever imagined? What if this was the reason the humans had disappeared? Had they been destroyed by their own creation? Or had they been the ones who had sealed it away, knowing the danger it posed to the galaxy? Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that this ship wasn't just a forgotten relic from the past. It was something far more ominous. It was a warning. The crew of the Galactica was about to uncover the truth, but she wasn't sure if the galaxy was ready for it. The shuttle doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the crew stepped onto the cold, metal surface of the human warship. The air was stale, and the corridors were dark, the lights barely flickering. They moved in silence, their boots echoing off the metal floors as they advanced deeper into the heart of the ship. Everything was eerily still. The silence was overwhelming. There were no signs of life, no sounds of movement, no whispers of communication. It was as if the ship was a tomb, one that had been abandoned for years, but still somehow preserved in a state of suspended animation. Captain Ilara led the team down one of the many corridors, her eyes scanning the surroundings. The walls were lined with strange symbols, some of them familiar, others completely alien. The technology was advanced, but it seemed to be from a time long past. Yet there was something timeless about the design, as if this ship had been built to withstand centuries of neglect. They reached a massive chamber, the heart of the ship. Inside, they found rows upon rows of consoles, all powered down. But in the center of the room, illuminated by a faint, eerie glow, was something that made their blood run cold. A massive chamber filled with cylindrical pods, each one containing something, or someone. The pods were sealed tight, but there were faint cracks in the glass. The figures inside were humanoid in shape, but their features were obscured by the dark mist that swirled within the pods. They seemed to be suspended in time, trapped in some sort of stasis. Lieutenant Reed stepped forward, her hand reaching for one of the pods. But before she could touch it, Ilara stopped her. "Don't," Ilara warned. "We don't know what's inside these pods or what happened to them. This could be the key to the ship's power." The silence around them was deafening as they all stood frozen, staring at the eerie figures trapped in stasis. Who were they? And why were they being kept in this way? Then, as if on cue, the entire ship trembled. The lights flickered violently, and a loud, grinding noise filled the air. A voice, distorted, ancient, and terrifying, rumbled through the ship's speakers. "It's time," it said, in a tone that sent shivers down their spines. "You have awoken us." The sound of the grinding noise reverberated throughout the ship, growing louder and more intense as the entire vessel seemed to come alive. The lights above flickered erratically before turning a deep red, casting an eerie glow over the crew. The hum of the ship's engines rumbled beneath their feet, as though the long-forgotten warship was waking from an age-old slumber. Captain Ilara's hand instinctively went to the sidearm on her belt, but she didn't pull it out. Instead, her eyes scanned the room, searching for the source of the voice. The words it had spoken sent a shiver through her. "You have awoken us." What did that mean? What had they awakened? The crew stood frozen, staring at the eerie pods in the center of the chamber. The figures inside remained motionless, their forms obscured by the swirling mist. There was something unnatural about them, something ancient. Then the voice spoke again, louder and clearer this time, echoing through the corridors of the ship. "Who dares disturb our rest?" The voice was deep, ancient, and full of power. It wasn't the voice of a human. It was something far older, something far more terrifying. Lieutenant Reed swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "What is that? Who is speaking?" "I don't know," Ilara answered, her eyes narrowing. "But we need to find out. Stay alert, everyone." The hum beneath their feet intensified, and the ship seemed to tremble with energy. Suddenly, the pods began to glow with a bright, pulsating light. The mist inside the pods started to swirl faster, and the figures within began to stir. The crew held their breath, watching in tense silence. Then, without warning, the glass of the pods cracked. The loud, deafening sound of shattering glass echoed through the chamber. The figures inside the pods were now moving, their limbs twitching, as if they were coming back to life after centuries of dormancy. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest as she took a step back. She could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her. Whatever had been kept in these pods was no ordinary crew. These were not just survivors from a long-forgotten war. These were something else, something far more dangerous. "We need to get out of here," Ensign Mason said urgently, his voice shaking. "This isn't right. We don't know what we're dealing with." But Ilara shook her head, her jaw set in determination. "We can't leave yet. We've come this far. We need to learn what happened here. We need to understand what these people are." The pods continued to crack open, and the figures inside began to slowly rise. They were humanoid, but their features were barely recognizable. Their eyes glowed a faint blue, and their skin seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly sheen. They moved with a grace that was both elegant and terrifying, as though they were more than just biological beings. They were something else entirely. The crew backed up slowly, their weapons drawn, but they didn't fire. They knew they weren't dealing with ordinary enemies. These figures, whoever they were, didn't seem to be hostile yet. They were just awakening. Ilara's voice was steady as she addressed the mysterious beings. "Who are you? What happened to the humans who built this ship?" The figures turned their heads toward her, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The leader of the group stepped forward, his voice deep and resonant as he spoke, his tone full of authority. "We are the ones who were forgotten," he said slowly. "We were placed in stasis by the humans, the very ones who created this ship. They feared what we had become. They feared the power we had unlocked. But now, you have awakened us." The words sent a shockwave through the crew. They had feared the ship might hold something dangerous, but now it seemed that the true danger wasn't the ship itself. It was what had been kept inside. The figure stepped closer, his glowing eyes locked onto Ilara's. "You are the descendants of the humans who sealed us away, aren't you?" he asked. "We have been waiting for you. For a long time." Ilara's mind raced, her heart hammering in her chest. The humans. Could these beings be the product of an experiment gone wrong? Or were they something even older, something beyond human comprehension? Before she could ask any more questions, the figure raised a hand, and the ship trembled once again. The lights flickered, and the crew was plunged into darkness. Then, in the silence, the voice from the speakers spoke once more. "It is time for the galaxy to know what lies within this ship. The galaxy will not be the same once we reveal our power." The voice echoed through the ship, vibrating in the bones of the crew. The tension in the air was palpable. What had they stumbled upon? What power had they just unleashed? Suddenly, the ship's engines roared to life, and the warship began to move. Slowly at first, but then picking up speed, as though it had a purpose. The crew struggled to maintain their footing as the ship veered off its original course. "We need to stop this," Ilara shouted, her voice filled with urgency. "Mason, find out what's controlling the engines. Reed, get to the weapons systems. We can't let this ship go any further." But before they could move, the figure who had spoken before turned toward Ilara, his gaze cold and unyielding. "You cannot stop what has already begun. The galaxy is ours now." Ilara's blood ran cold. She knew this wasn't just a simple mission. This was a turning point, a moment that would determine the fate of not just their ship, but the entire galaxy. And the humans aboard the Galactica had just awakened something far more dangerous than they could ever have imagined. The crew staggered as the ship's sudden acceleration threw them off balance. Alarms blared throughout the corridors, their shrill cries adding to the chaos. The once dead warship now surged through the stars, propelled by some unseen force, as if it had a mind of its own. Captain Ilara struggled to regain her footing. "Report," she ordered, her voice sharp, cutting through the cacophony of blaring alarms and confused murmurs. Ensign Mason's hands flew over the control panels, but his expression grew more panicked with every passing second. "Captain, I can't override the engines. Whatever's taking control, it's not from any human technology I've ever seen," he exclaimed, sweat beading on his forehead. "Damn it," Ilara muttered under her breath. She turned to face the leader of the mysterious beings, who stood still at the front of the chamber, watching the crew with those glowing, emotionless eyes. The being didn't flinch at the chaos unfolding around them. It was as if it had expected this all along. The leader took a step forward, his voice booming through the room once again. "You should have never interfered with our slumber. Now you will witness the true power of the Elder Legion." "Ilara," Lieutenant Reed's voice trembled as she approached cautiously. "What do they mean by Elder Legion?" The leader's gaze flicked briefly to Reed. "The Elder Legion," he began slowly, his words heavy with meaning, "is the last remaining force of a forgotten empire, a race that once ruled the galaxy before the first collapse." Ilara felt her heart skip a beat. "A forgotten empire?" she asked, barely able to believe the words she was hearing. "Yes," the leader replied, his voice cold. "We were the creators of the warships you now command. We seeded countless worlds, pushing them to grow in our image. But when the first collapse came, we were cast into stasis to preserve our strength, while the galaxy tore itself apart. Your people, the humans, are the reason we remained in slumber for so long." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Ilara's mind raced as she tried to process what the leader was saying. An empire, long lost to history, wielding power beyond comprehension, and now awakened once more. The galaxy had no idea what was about to unfold. "Why did you awaken now?" Ilara demanded, trying to steady her voice. "Why after all this time?" The leader's glowing eyes met hers, and for a moment, a flicker of something ancient and deep, crossed his features. "Because the galaxy has become weak. The forces that once sought to stop us no longer have the power to do so. You have seen the map. You have seen the blank space that lies at the edge of the galaxy. That is where we were hidden. Now, we have returned." Ilara's blood ran cold as the implications of his words sank in. The blank space on the galactic map. The place where no one dared venture. Now, that space was being filled, and with it came the resurgence of a force powerful enough to shake the very foundation of the galaxy. Suddenly, the warship lurched again, this time with much more force. The lights flickered violently, and the crew stumbled as the ship's momentum increased. The ship's course had changed. They were heading somewhere they weren't supposed to be. "Where are we going?" Ilara demanded, stepping forward. The leader didn't answer immediately. Instead, he raised his hand, and the ship's hull vibrated in response. The floor beneath them seemed to shift as if the ship itself were opening up to reveal something hidden. Then the answer came, just a whisper, like a breath of wind. "To the heart of the galaxy." "The heart of the galaxy," Ilara repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "But..." Before she could finish, the warship's viewport flickered, and for the first time since they had entered the vessel, the stars outside became visible. What Ilara saw made her stomach drop. The stars had shifted. The familiar constellations were gone, replaced by something far more terrifying. A massive structure loomed ahead, unmistakable in its size. It looked like a city, but the architecture was alien, dark, and ominous, with spires reaching up like fingers clawing at the heavens. "Ilara, what is that?" Lieutenant Reed gasped, her voice filled with awe and dread. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. That is what we've been looking for, but we never knew it existed." The leader's voice echoed again. "Welcome to HFY, the heart of our empire, the center of everything. And now, it is where your fate will be sealed." Suddenly, the warship's hull rattled once more, and the crew were thrown to the ground. The ship had come to a stop, floating silently in the cold void. The massive structure ahead loomed closer, casting a shadow that stretched across the warship like a dark omen. Ilara scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. "Prepare yourselves," she ordered her crew, the urgency in her voice sharp. "We don't know what's waiting for us on that station, but we need to be ready for anything." The figure of the leader turned toward her. "Oh, we are not going to HFY just for your readiness, Captain. We are here because the galaxy is weak. The cycle of collapse is about to repeat, and this time there will be no escape for anyone." As the warship drifted toward the heart of the galaxy, Ilara knew one thing for certain. The stakes had just been raised, and now they had no choice but to face what they had awakened. The warship drifted closer to the massive structure, its engines now silent. The crew was in complete awe of what they saw, a city larger than anything they had ever encountered. The structure stretched into the depths of space, an enormous dark monolith that seemed to pulse with energy. It was as if it were alive, ancient, and far beyond the technology the human race had ever developed. The leader's cold, emotionless gaze shifted toward Captain Ilara. "Welcome to HFY, the cradle of our might," he said, his voice reverberating in the chamber. Ilara couldn't tear her eyes away from the structure. This is where it all started," she murmured. "The origin of the Elder Legion." "Yes," the leader replied with a slight nod. "HFY was where we first conquered the stars, long before your species even learned to dream of space. We are the architects of all that you know, and we will reclaim what is ours. What do you want from us?" Ilara's voice was strained, demanding an answer. She could feel the pressure of the situation weighing down on her shoulders. "You are the ones who awakened us," the leader answered, turning away from her to gaze out at the vastness of HFY. "And for that, you will bear witness to our return. You will see the power of the Elder Legion firsthand." "Power?" Lieutenant Reed spoke up, her voice trembling. "What kind of power are we talking about?" The leader's eyes flicked to Reed, and for a moment, something like a smile tugged at his lips. "The kind of power that destroyed entire star systems. The kind of power that ended wars with a single strike. The kind of power that your people have never seen." Ilara's stomach turned. The galaxy had no idea what was coming for it. The warship slowly moved toward one of the many massive docking ports on the outer edge of the structure. The entrance was enormous, big enough to swallow the entire warship with ease. There was no choice but to comply, as if the ship itself knew that they were bound to enter, to face whatever awaited them. The crew members exchanged uneasy glances. There was no turning back. They were about to enter the heart of an empire that had long been lost to history, and whatever lay inside would determine the fate of the entire galaxy. Once the warship was docked, the crew was ordered to assemble in the main chamber. The leader led them, his dark, flowing form gliding ahead of them as they followed reluctantly. Each step they took seemed to echo through the vast corridors, which were eerily quiet, too quiet, as if the very walls were listening to their every move. They entered a grand hall, massive in scale, with towering walls that seemed to stretch endlessly upward, lost in shadows. At the far end, a throne stood, elevated on a dais. It was made of a dark, metallic substance that shimmered in the dim light. And sitting upon the throne was another figure, one that made the hair on the back of Ilara's neck stand up. It was a being unlike any she had seen. It was tall, its body covered in ornate armor that seemed to shift and pulse with energy. Its face was obscured by a helmet, But Ilara could feel its gaze on her, cold and calculating. The air around the throne crackled with an undeniable power, one that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. "Who is that?" Lieutenant Reed whispered, her voice barely audible. "The Emperor," the leader said softly. "He is the last of our kind, the one who rules HFY. And now he awakens." Ilara swallowed hard. "It's he." Her voice faltered as she tried to find the right words. "Is he still in control?" The leader shook his head. "He is more than in control. He is power incarnate. And now you will see the strength of the Elder Legion firsthand." The Emperor's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "You have come, humans. You have come to witness the return of the gods. The galaxy will tremble at our might." The crew stood in silence, their hearts racing. What had they walked into? They had awakened something far greater than they could have imagined. The Emperor, the ruler of HFY, was more than just a being. They were facing the person who controlled the most dangerous force the galaxy had ever known. Ilara's mind raced as she tried to comprehend what was happening. The Elder Legion had returned, and they were here to take back what they believed was rightfully theirs. The galaxy was on the verge of something unimaginable, and it wasn't just the Elder Legion that Ilara feared. It was the Emperor, a being of unimaginable power who could reshape the very fabric of the universe with a single command. "What happens now?" Ilara asked, her voice trembling but steady. The leader turned toward her, his glowing eyes filled with an ancient cold promise. "Now you will understand why we are the most feared force in the galaxy. Now you will see what it means to awaken the Elder Legion." And with those words, the warship's crew was thrown into a storm of unimaginable consequences. They had come to witness the rebirth of the most powerful force in the galaxy, but the cost of awakening them was more than they could have ever imagined. The fate of the galaxy now rested in their hands, and they had no idea what was coming next. The atmosphere inside HFY was suffocating, an oppressive silence that clung to every corner of the colossal structure. The crew of the human warship had no choice but to follow the lead of the mysterious figure who had brought them here. The Emperor sat upon his throne, his helmeted gaze fixed on them, with an intensity that made Ilara's skin crawl. "We have waited for millennia." The Emperor's voice echoed throughout the chamber, each word reverberating with the weight of centuries. "Now, it is time to restore what was taken from us." The air around the throne seemed to shift, the walls of the great hall pulsating as if alive. Strange symbols, glowing faintly in the dim light, appeared along the stone walls, slowly moving and rearranging into patterns Ilara couldn't understand. The ship's crew stood frozen, unable to take their eyes off the dark figure that had awakened something deep within the galaxy. Ilara swallowed hard. "What do you want from us?" The Emperor's lips twitched beneath his helmet, and the leader beside them smiled, a smile that was cold and devoid of any warmth. "You will be the witnesses," he said. "You will watch as the Elder Legion takes back what is ours. You are the key to unlocking the power that has been dormant for so long." The leader's words hung in the air like a curse, and Ilara's heart pounded in her chest. They had awakened a force beyond their understanding, and now they were powerless to stop what was coming. But even more terrifying than the Elder Legion's return was the feeling that they were no longer in control of their own fate. The galaxy's future was no longer in the hands of the humans. It was now in the hands of something far older and far more dangerous. Suddenly, a deep rumble shook the floor beneath them, a tremor that spread through the entire structure. Ilara's eyes widened as the ground seemed to crack open, revealing a vast, glowing abyss beneath them. The Emperor stood, his figure towering over them as his hands began to move in intricate patterns, the symbols on the walls responding in kind. The ground rumbled again, louder this time, as if the entire structure were coming to life. Ilara's heart raced as she realized what was happening. The Emperor wasn't just commanding the walls or the symbols. He was summoning something, a power greater than anything the galaxy had ever known. The crew gasped as energy erupted from the cracks in the ground, streaking up into the sky above them. Bright, white tendrils of pure energy began to pulse, swirling and twisting like living beings. They rose higher and higher, filling the great hall with an overwhelming brilliance. It was as if the stars themselves were being drawn into the Emperor's command. "This is the power of HFY," the leader said softly, his eyes gleaming with pride. "The power of the Elder Legion. You are witnessing the birth of a new era." The ground shook violently, and for a moment, Ilara thought the entire structure might collapse. But it didn't. The energy surged upward, forming into a colossal, glowing shape that hovered above the throne. The figure was humanoid, its form made entirely of light and raw energy. It radiated a presence so overwhelming that the very air seemed to bend under its weight. "It is time," the Emperor whispered, his voice barely audible over the deafening roar of the energy. "Let the galaxy witness the power of the Elder Legion." With a wave of his hand, the glowing figure shot upward, disappearing through the ceiling in a flash of blinding light. The walls trembled as if the very foundation of the structure were being torn apart, but the Emperor remained still, his gaze fixed on the darkened sky beyond. The crew stood in stunned silence. They had known the Elder Legion was powerful, but this was something far beyond their worst fears. The entire galaxy would be at the mercy of this power. They had awakened it. And now, there was no stopping it. Ilara turned to her crew, her voice barely a whisper. "What have we done?" But the leader didn't answer her. Instead, he raised his arms, as if an offering to the glowing figure that now hovered far above them. "You've done exactly what was needed," he said. "You have brought about the return of the greatest force the galaxy has ever known. And now you will serve us. The Elder Legion will not stop until every corner of this galaxy is under our control." Ilara's mind raced, her thoughts spinning. She had never imagined that this was the power they would awaken. It wasn't just the return of an ancient force. It was the rebirth of a galaxy-dominating empire. And they were right in the middle of it. The crew had no idea what to do. There were no backup plans, no escape routes. They had committed to this course, whether they had intended to or not. The leader turned toward Ilara, his eyes dark and full of unspoken promises. "The galaxy will bow to the Elder Legion," he said, "and you will see the power of the Emperor's will." Suddenly, a sharp, high-pitched sound tore through the air, followed by the thundering boom of an explosion. The sound of distant battle rang through the vast halls, and for a moment, Ilara thought she might be imagining it. But the sound grew louder, closer. "We are not alone," the leader said, his voice grim. "Others have taken notice." The air shifted once again, as if something was stirring deep within the galaxy. Ilara realized then that the power they had awakened might not go uncontested. Other forces, perhaps just as old and just as powerful, might now be closing in. The Elder Legion might be the most feared force in the galaxy, but they were not the only force. And that could be the only thing that might save them. The crew stood motionless in the chamber, their faces pale from the overwhelming reality that had unfolded around them. The hum of power from the glowing figure above still buzzed in the air, and a feeling of dread pressed down on everyone in the room. The Emperor's intentions were clear now. He sought to dominate the galaxy, to use the unimaginable power of the Elder Legion to crush every civilization that dared to stand in his way. The human Warship crew, caught in the midst of this terrifying awakening, was left with nothing but a growing sense of urgency. They had made a mistake, a terrible one, by awakening this ancient power. And now, they were trapped in a galaxy that would soon burn with the flames of war. But there was something else brewing beneath the surface, an unspoken whisper among the crew. It was the seed of an idea, one that Ilara couldn't ignore. Even as the Emperor's voice continued to echo in the chamber, her mind raced, trying to piece together something they could use to turn the tide. "Ilara," a voice called out. It was Commander Thorn, his eyes filled with the same determination that had carried them through so many battles. "We can't just stand here. There has to be a way to stop this. We need to find a way to fight back. Ilara's gaze shifted toward the walls of the chamber. The symbols that had once glowed with dark power were now dull, as if the energy that had once surged through them was being drained away. A small flicker of hope sparked inside her. Could the power that had been awakened be used against them? Could they turn it against the Emperor, the Elder Legion, and the galaxy itself? But the answer, Ilara knew, wasn't simple. The Emperor had awakened a force that could not be easily undone. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. Yet Ilara had a gut feeling that there was more to the situation than it appeared. There had to be a way to reverse the damage, to stop the Elder Legion before they could lay waste to everything. As if to punctuate her thoughts, a sudden shockwave rattled the chamber. The walls trembled, and the air seemed to crackle with raw energy. Ilara stumbled back, clutching onto the edge of a nearby table. It felt as if the very foundation of HFY was shaking. "Something's happening," Thorn said, his voice tense. "It's as if they're waking up even more." Indeed, Ilara could feel it now, a sense of growing instability, an expansion of power beyond their understanding. The glowing figure above them, once hovering ominously in place, now seemed to pulse and sway as if it were struggling to contain the raw energy within. Ilara's heart raced as she realized what was happening. The Elder Legion was not just coming to life. It was becoming something more. An unstoppable force that might just bring the galaxy to its knees. They couldn't just wait and see what happened next. They had to act. Now. "Ilara, we need to get to the control room," Thorn said, his voice urgent. "We need to find a way to disrupt the flow of energy, or else everything will be destroyed." Without wasting another moment, Ilara turned and ran toward the door, followed closely by the rest of the crew. They raced through the corridors of the ship, their footsteps echoing in the silence that had descended upon them. Each of them was gripped with the same fear, the fear that they might be too late. When they finally reached the control room, they were met with the full extent of the damage. The console, which had once been their link to the outside galaxy, was now a chaotic mess of flashing lights and static. The crew scrambled to find some way to stabilize the situation, their hands shaking as they worked to make sense of the system. "There has to be something we can do," Ilara muttered, her mind whirling as she tried to find a solution. Thorn's voice cut through the confusion. "Wait. There's an emergency override. It's not much, but it could work if we can access it." With no time to lose, Ilara's fingers flew over the control panel, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea if this would work, if they could shut down the power the Emperor had unleashed. But it was their only chance. The seconds stretched into eternity as she worked. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and every passing moment felt like an eternity. Finally, a small beep rang through the control room. A red light flickered on the panel. "I've got it," Ilara gasped, her voice a mix of relief and disbelief. "The override's activated. We can stop the flow of energy." Without wasting another second, she pushed the final button. The room plunged into darkness, and for a terrifying moment, Ilara feared that they had failed. But then, slowly, the lights returned. The hum of power that had filled the air began to fade. The energy that had once radiated from the glowing figure began to dissipate, swirling back into the cracks in the ground below. For the first time since the Elder Legion's power had awakened, the room was silent. "Ilara, you did it," Thorn breathed, his voice filled with awe. But Ilara wasn't celebrating. She knew this was just the beginning. The Emperor would not give up easily. The Elder Legion might have been stilled for now, but that power was still very real. And now, Ilara realized, the real battle was only just beginning. The galaxy was on the brink of war, and the crew of the human warship had just made a dangerous enemy. The Elder Legion, even weakened, would stop at nothing to reclaim its strength. But for now, the galaxy was safe, and that small victory would have to be enough to rally the forces that would stand against the impending storm. As Ilara gazed out at the stars beyond, She knew one thing for certain. The human race had awakened something that could never be forgotten, and they would have to fight like never before to protect everything they held dear.